Samurai were not white, and Hollywood needs to accept that. White people love inserting themselves into histories where they never belonged, and nowhere is that more obvious than with samurai culture. They pretend that samurai were universal warriors instead of an elite Japanese class. They cast white actors as samurai like Japan doesn't have thousands of years of its own history. They push the narrative that foreigners became samurai, ignoring the fact that this was an extreme rarity. They act like Tom Cruise saved the samurai in Last Samurai, when in reality, Japan didn't need saving from itself. At some point, we have to ask, why are white people so desperate to steal samurai history? Samurai weren't just fighters. They were a noble class deeply embedded in Japanese society, politics, and culture. The samurai emerged in the late Heian period between 794 and 1185 as an elite warrior class serving Japanese feudal lords known as daimyos. They followed Bushido, or the Way of the Warrior, a strict honor code unique to Japan. They were bound by loyalty to their daimyo, whose authority was based on deep ancestral lineage. Samurai were tied to Japan's caste system, which strictly limited who could hold warrior status. Translation: samurai were not random mercenaries. Becoming one required being born into the system. So when white people say, but some foreigners became samurai, that's like saying a few exceptions prove the rule doesn't exist. White people love pointing to a handful of foreigners who technically became samurai to justify their obsession. But let's look at who they were. William Adams, or Mira Engin, was an English sailor stranded in Japan in 1600. Tokugawa Ieyasu gave him an honorary samurai title for his navigation skills, but he never actually fought as a samurai warrior. He was more of an advisor. Jan Justin van Lodenstein was a Dutch trader who gained samurai status, but again, he was a merchant, not a warrior. Yasaki was an African warrior who served under Oda Nobunaga in the 1500s. He is the only known non-Japanese samurai who actually fought in battle. Now, let's compare them to actual samurai. Real samurai trained from birth, followed strict Bushido codes, and served for generations. Foreigners who were called samurai mostly served as advisors, traders, or diplomats, not as warriors. The bottom line, white people were never a part of samurai history. Being granted a title does not mean actually being a samurai. Hollywood exaggerates the tiny number of foreign samurai to justify whitewashing. Western media cannot handle a story where white people are not the main focus, so they literally rewrite history to make samurai about them. In The Last Samurai, Tom Cruise plays a white man who learns the way of the samurai and somehow becomes their best warrior. This is pure fiction. Japan never had an American savior. In 47 Ronin, Keanu Reeves plays a whitewashed version of an actual Japanese story, with the film adding a half-white character who never existed. In Ghost of Tsushima, despite being well-researched, the game was primarily written by white developers, reinforcing a Western perspective on samurai culture. Why does this keep happening? Because non-white audiences can't relate to non-white heroes, so Hollywood keeps forcing white characters into historical narratives. They romanticize samurai as honorable warriors, but ignore actual Japanese history and politics. They make white men the best samurai, to push the idea that whiteness is superior, even in foreign cultures. This isn't historical accuracy. It's white fantasy. White people act like Japan needed them to modernize or save its traditions. This is completely false. Japan maintained a highly organized military class for centuries, without Western influence. The Meiji Restoration in 1868 moderned Japan on Japanese terms, not because of foreign intervention. Samurai lost power due to internal reforms. White people had nothing to do with it. Japan didn't need white experts on samurai culture. White historians constantly interpret samurai culture instead of letting Japanese scholars lead the conversation. Western martial artists claim to be samurai masters, despite having zero connection to Japan. Samurai aesthetics such as the katana, bushido, and armor are constantly appropriated in Western media, ignoring the deep cultural significance. White people don't respect samurai history. They cherry pick the parts they like and erase the rest. Samurai were not white. White people were never a part of samurai history. Hollywood needs to stop lying about it. Samurai belong to Japan, not white revisionists, not Western filmmakers, and definitely not Tom Cruise. Cope.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, Africans. I hope you're doing fine where you are, and if you ain't doing fine, please do fine where you are. It's always good to be fine, you understand? So, let's talk about brainwash. What is brainwash, in fact? Brainwash is the idea someone sells you to believe that maybe what you have is less and what they have is more. And so if you go where they are, you get a better deal, that is brainwash. Many times we've found a lot of African doctors, we have teachers, we have engineers who are very much smart, They don't work for Africans anymore. They work for the West. They go to countries like Australia, they go to countries like Japan, USA, Europe, UK. No problem with you going any place you want. My problem comes when everyone thinks that for you to make it, you have to go over there. There is where I have a problem, But this is a design that was powerfully calculated. It's not a problem of today. It's a problem of the past. It's an old ghost. You understand? And so many times the white people came into Africa and they told us that white was always better than black. And we believed that. In fact, there's an entire generation that believes white is always the superior race. But the Bible contradicts all this. The Bible tells us that God made man and he made them equal, And in fact, evidence has it that the first person was black, History has always told us that many things originated from Africa. But that is not the truth that is being told in the books. These scholars who write today's history, these scholars who write what we read today are white scholars. So they had to write articles, they had to write documentaries, they had to write whatever they were writing back, scrolls, whatever, in their favor, Egypt is always a black country, Egypt is a black country, but we are told mzuri kesho we are told that Egypt is part of Europe or part of Asia, but Egypt has always been part of Africa. As I think you can remember the documentary that was done about Cleopatra, where Netflix decided to portray Cleopatra as black. A lot of white people were so much enraged. Yeah, they were so much enraged, saying, no, Cleopatra was a white. Egypt was a white man's land. Egypt was full of whites. No, Egypt is in Africa. And in fact, we have a group of people called Nubians who still live in Egypt up to date. So we had the Nubian Empire. We had the Nubian kingdom that was there in the past. These people also took part in the building of those pyramids. Many times we know of the Gaza pyramids or Giza pyramids, but we also have pyramids in Sudan, the northern part of Sudan, So I look back and I think that a lot of stupid narrative has been sold to us as black people, and the white man has always whitewashed history in his favor. And it's funny that it does not only happen in Africa, it also happens in other continents. It happens in Asia, it happens in Southern America, it happens in North America, it happens in Australia. They are always touching everywhere. So there is a white man who came up and explained this thing better with deeper understanding about the samurais. The samurai is an elite force of Japan back then in the ancient past, And so it's told that there was a white samurai who saved Japan and all that. No. Why is the white person always everywhere meddling in people's affairs? There's so much to learn from these white gentlemen. I want us to jump into this video, watch it, I shall get back with a deep, critical analysis. Let's dive in.
White people have never been a majority. Anywhere. Ever. White supremacists love to claim that white people are a default majority in certain regions and are now being replaced. The truth? White people have never been a global majority. Not even in Europe. Not even in the US. Not even at the peak of their global dominance. At every point in recorded human history, the majority of people have been from Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Not from Europe. In the ancient world, the largest populations were always in China, India, and Africa. After 1500 CE, even during European colonial expansion, Asia alone had more people than Europe, Africa, and the Americas combined. Today, white Europeans and their descendants only make up about 11 to 12% of the world's entire population. There's never been a time in history when white people were even close to being a majority. Even within Europe itself, white as an identity is a modern invention, and different groups fought and defined themselves more by class, religion, and culture than by race. Ancient Europe was a mix of Celtic, Germanic, Slavic, Middle Eastern, and Mediterranean influences. Southern Europe, Italy, Greece, Spain, and Portugal, has always been heavily mixed with African, Asian, and Middle Eastern influences. The Ottoman Empire controlled much of Southern and Eastern Europe for centuries, integrating people from Turkey, North Africa, and the Balkans. The idea that Europe was ever a racially homogeneous white homeland is pure fiction. White supremacists claim that the US was originally a white nation. The truth is, indigenous people were the majority for 13,000 years before white settlers arrived. The US was built on stolen land, with a population of African slaves making up a significant portion of early American labor. Mass European immigration in the late 1800s and early 1900s artificially increased the white population. The 1790 Naturalization Act restricted citizenship to free white persons, specifically to inflate white numbers. White people only became a numerical majority in North America because of land theft, genocide, and racist immigration policies. Despite European colonial rule, Latin America was never majority white. Spain and Portugal ruled, but never whitened the continent. They intermarried with indigenous and African peoples, creating a racially mixed society. Most of Latin America today is mestizo, mixed indigenous and European descent, or Afro-Latinx. Even Argentina and Chile, often considered the whitest Latin American countries, have significant indigenous and non-European ancestry. At no point has Latin America ever been majority white. It's always been majority indigenous, black, or mixed race. South Africa and other white settler colonies were never white majority. In South Africa, white settlers ruled under apartheid but were never more than 10% of the population. In Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, the British and Afrikaners held political dominance but never numerical majority. In Kenya, Algeria, and other European colonies in Africa, whites controlled the economies and government but were always a tiny fraction of the population. White rule was based on military dominance, not numbers. During the height of European colonialism from the 1800s to the early 1900s, white Europeans controlled vast territories but never outnumbered the people they ruled. The British Empire, the largest in history, ruled over 400 million people, most of them South Asian, African, and Middle Eastern. The French Empire controlled huge areas of Africa and Indochina but never outnumbered the locals. White supremacists like to claim they're being replaced. But they've never been a global majority, so how can they be replaced? Non-white populations are simply growing because of normal demographics. White birth rates are declining due to social and economic factors, not some kind of conspiracy. White people aren't being replaced. They were never the world's dominant population to begin with.
The term Moor comes from the Greek moros, meaning black people. Everyone living south of the Mediterranean was called Moor. Later the Roman Mauritania, the land of the Moors, or the land of black people. I was requested by some North Africans to talk about black Berber. It hurts my heart to know what racism did to my Berber brothers and sisters. Islam is not racist, but what happened to the Berbers is the same thing that happened in the Middle East. During colonization, German anthropologists and historians were fascinated with this idea of race and wanted to attribute everything superior to the white race and inferior to the black race. And the Berber then was black, brown, mixed, and somewhere whiter. So the Germans took the white Berber, said these are the real Amazigh, and the black ones, they are descendants of slave or West Saharan Africa, which is uncivilized. But West Africa was unexplored by those idiots. So today, all black Berbers and black Arabs in Arabia think they are descendants of slaves, but they are actually the indigenous.
No black people discovered any new territory. At least not according to my history books.
On whose account of history are you talking about?
The history books I've been taught with in school.
Written by your people.
I can't remember a single black man in those books, honestly.
In those books. History was whitewashed, and a lot of things, a lot of these discoveries that are evolving now has already been discovered in Africa.
Of course.
They're going to write history based on their accounts,
right? Not
on the account of Africans. I'm telling you. So that's why you can see that history has been whitewashed.
Yeah.
Because the enslavers, the colonizers, they will always write the histories to favor their narrative.
Right.
Even if we are victims of crimes, they will still find a way to turn it the other way, so it looks like it was our fault.
Yeah.
We all saw what happened to George Floyd, where the cop kneeled down on he was screaming, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe."
Yeah.
You kneel down on his neck. And during the investigation, they were still trying to turn it around. That have you checked his history?
Like what?
He was a local drug dealer.
Yeah.
He did this. He did that. Yeah. So does that justify his killing?
No, absolutely not.
I thought people knew this. I didn't know people didn't know this information, but it's not new. I thought people knew that the people from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, are actually dark people. Everything under the sun is either dark or brown dark. So there's no tree that is white. There is no sand that is white. There is no plant that is white under the sun. Everything under the sun is dark or brown dark, like my skin. If not, they're dark. My ancestors come from ancient Kemet. They are darker. Over the thousands of years, I got mixed with the Mongolian, the Caucasian, so I got lighter. But I know for a fact, I know history, my people are dark people, and they're the people who was the original people of ancient Kemet. I thought people knew this. The white Arab that you see in Egypt right now, they came like around 2,000 years ago. They're not the original people of the land. They did not build the pyramid. I thought people knew this, and that's not an insult towards the Arab. But the original people of this land, of ancient Kemet, are dark people. And some of them still live in Egypt. But they don't give a lot of light on these people. But I thought people knew this. But it looked like not everybody knows this. But the original people of ancient Kemet that you call Egypt are dark people. The descendants are the Ethiopian, the Somalian, all the people that the Kushite, all these people are the descendant of ancient Kemet, because Egypt, in case you didn't know, was bigger than what you see right now, and it was conquered by the Kushite, and then it got separate and it become what you call ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. Man, know your history, man. The original people of this land are dark people, man. You heard?
Europeans didn't conquer anyone because they were stronger, smarter, or superior in any way. They were walking sacks of disease that coughed their way to world domination and then rewrote history to make themselves look powerful. White supremacists love to bring up Hernan Cortés defeating the Aztecs like it was some brilliant military strategy. Let's break down what actually happened. Cortés and his 600 men arrived in 1519. The Aztec Empire had a standing army of hundreds of thousands of men, In a fair fight, the Spanish would have been obliterated. The first battles, Cortez lost. The Aztecs kicked his forces out of Tenochtitlan in 1520 during the Noche Triste, or the Sad Night, forcing him to flee like a scared child. Then came smallpox. The disease brought over by just one infected slave among the Spanish ranks ripped through the Aztecs, killing about 50% of them in just 1 year. The smallpox didn't just kill warriors, it killed priests, generals, and even the emperor himself. By the time Cortez returned in 1521, Tenochtitlan was a rotting corpse of a city. The Spaniards just walked in and mopped up the remains. And yet, some people act like he was a military genius. The truth is, he was getting absolutely destroyed until a virus stepped in and did the work for him. Same thing happened with the Inca Empire. Francisco Pizarro didn't conquer the Incas. He showed up after smallpox had wiped out millions of them and thrown the empire into a civil war. The Inca Emperor Huayna Capac and his heir both died from smallpox before they had even heard of the Spanish. This led to a civil war between his two sons Atahualpa and Huáscar. Pizarro and his 168 men didn't win against the Incas. They took advantage of a civilization already in chaos, kidnapped the emperor, and murdered unarmed people at the Battle of Cajamarca. You want to act like that's military superiority? That's opportunism at best, and genocide at worst. And when disease wasn't fast enough, Europeans weaponized it. The British literally handed out smallpox-infected blankets to natives in 1763. And this wasn't a rumor. British generals wrote about it in their own letters. Nor was it a one-off case. The Europeans knew that their disease was their deadliest weapon, and used it. And let's talk about Africa, since you love pretending that Europeans just walked in and took over. Europeans couldn't even get past the coasts for centuries because African kingdoms were too powerful and the climate was too deadly for them. The Zulu kingdom under Shaka Zulu wiped out British forces using nothing but spears and superior battle tactics. The Ashanti Empire held off British colonization for nearly 100 years. So how did the British finally win? Not through strength, not through strategy. That's right, through the Maxim machine gun. During the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, British soldiers, armed with machine guns, massacred 10,000 Sudanese warriors and lost only 48 men in 1 day. That wasn't war, that was slaughter. The second Europeans had guns that could wipe out entire armies in minutes, they stopped pretending to fight fair and turned Africa into a bloodbath. And now you pathetic little keyboard crusaders sit in 2025 and talk about how the Europeans were strong and superior. If they were so strong, why did they need diseases and industrial weapons to win? If they were so dominant, why did they keep losing wars until they could turn battlefields into mass graveyards with machine guns? Your ancestors weren't conquerors. They were plague rats who got lucky. The gladiators were not white. They were black, Middle Eastern, and enslaved Europeans. White supremacists love to imagine gladiators as pure, noble, white warriors fighting for glory in the Colosseum. Hollywood has backed up this myth, with movies like Gladiator, always starring some rugged, blue-eyed European man fighting for freedom. The reality? Gladiators were a multi-ethnic mix of enslaved Africans, Middle Easterners, Celts, Germans, and others, most of whom were forced to fight for the entertainment of the Roman elite. The first gladiators were not white. They were enslaved prisoners of war and foreigners. Gladiator fights originated from the Etruscan funeral rituals. They weren't even originally Roman. The first gladiators were enslaved people from conquered nations, including North Africans, Gauls, Thracians, and Middle Easterners. Rome's entire economy was built on enslaving and exploiting foreign people, meaning the average gladiator was not some noble Roman citizen, but an outsider. Black gladiators were common and highly valued. North African and Ethiopian gladiators were famous across the Roman Empire. Ancient Roman art even depicts them. Rome had extensive trade and slavery networks with Africa, meaning that African gladiators were regularly imported. The word Aethiops, meaning Ethiopians, appears in gladiator inscriptions, proving the black gladiators fought in the arena. The Moors, black North Africans, were also common in gladiatorial combat. If Rome was so white, why did they keep depicting black warriors in their artwork? Middle Eastern gladiators were among the most skilled fighters. Rome recruited soldiers and enslaved fighters from the Middle East, including Parthians and Syrians. Gladiators from Levant, modern-day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, were known for their agility and their skills with curved swords. The Roman army was full of Arabs and Persians, so it makes sense that the gladiatorial schools included Middle Eastern fighters. Most gladiators were not freemen. They were slaves forced to fight. Despite Hollywood's bullshit noble warrior fantasy, the truth is most gladiators were enslaved men who had no choice. They were prisoners of war, criminals, and debt slaves who were bought and trained under brutal conditions. Gladiator schools operated like slave labor camps where men were beaten, starved, and forced to fight to survive. White supremacists love to fantasize about gladiators, but forget that they were the lowest class in Rome. The most famous gladiator, Spartacus, was an enslaved Thracian, not a white hero. Women were also gladiators, and they weren't white either. Emperor Domitian once hosted a fight between Ethiopian woman warriors. Gladiators were not noble Roman warriors. They were enslaved foreigners, mostly Africans, Middle Easterners, and Celts. The arena was filled with black and brown people, not just white guys. Hollywood erased the truth because white supremacists can't handle that Rome wasn't a white empire. If gladiators were so white, why does history prove otherwise? Cope.
Now, after clearly watching this video, I have a deep critical analysis I want us to share together, and let's learn together from these occurrences. Now, the basic and the most important thing here is the theme that has been prevalent, which is the theme of history whitewashing. You know, history has been whitewashed not only in Africa but many parts. So we are going to look at the many parts that history has been whitewashed, its effects. Also, we are going to look specifically at the whitewashing of black history in Africa and in the Americas. You know, first of all, whitewashing history. This is the erasure of black contribution and its global effects, and also the erasure of the other world population contribution and its effects. History is often shaped by those who hold power, and throughout the world, the contribution and experiences of black people have frequently been minimized, altered, or erased. This phenomenon, also known as whitewashing history, involves distorting or omitting historical events to favor the dominant narrative. Which one is the dominant narrative? The white narrative, you know? This is often downplaying the oppression of black people and erasing their achievements. Also downplaying the role of the samurai, for instance, from the gentleman, the role of other communities, and downplaying their achievements. Whitewashing has serious consequences, including the perpetuation of racial inequality, cultural erasure, and the miseducation of future generations. Whitewashing of black history around the world. In many parts of the world, history books and mainstream media have failed to fully acknowledge the role of black people, individuals, and communities in shaping societies. For example, the transatlantic slave trade is often discussed without addressing the brutal realities of slavery, the economic benefits it brought to European nations, or the lasting impact on African nations. Similarly, the accomplishment of black leaders, inventors, and revolutionaries are frequently overlooked or attributed to white figures. In the USA, the civil rights movement is sometimes taught in a way that sanitizes the struggle, portraying figures like Martin Luther King Jr. as peaceful dreamers while ignoring the radical aspects of their activism. Meanwhile, in Europe, the history of colonialism is often presented in a way that emphasizes civilizing missions, you know, rather than the exploitation, violence, and the destruction of African cultures and other cultures around the world. The Caribbean, South America, and even parts of Asia have also witnessed a rewriting of history that downplays the presence and influences of black communities and they themselves. What is the effect of this whitewashing of history? The first one is perpetuation of racism and inequality. When history is rewritten to minimize the struggles and contribution of black people, it reinforces racial stereotypes and systemic inequalities. If black achievements are ignored, it becomes easier to justify racial discrimination and deny black people opportunities. Without a truthful historical foundation, racism continues to be deeply embedded in social structures. The second one is miseducation and ignorance. Whitewashed history prevents people from fully understanding the truth about race relations, oppressions, and resistance. Many students grow up believing a false narrative that ignores the resilience and the strength of black communities. This lack of awareness leads to ignorance and misconception about racial issues, making it harder to address them in modern society. The third one is loss of cultural identity. When black history is erased or misrepresented, black people around the world struggle to connect with their roots and identity. A lack of historical presentation can lead to feelings of inferiority, as many grow up without knowledge of the powerful legacies left by their ancestors. This erasure weakens cultural pride and limits the transmission of traditional knowledge. The fourth one is this: underrepresentation in media and academia. Whitewashing also affects how black people are portrayed in films, literature, and academic research. Historical figures are often portrayed by white actors in movies, and social and historical narratives frequently credit white figures for black achievements. This lack of representation distorts reality and discourages young black individuals from seeing themselves as capable of greatness. The fifth one is continued economic and political oppression. By erasing the histories of black communities, societies ignore the long-lasting effects of past injustices such as slavery, segregation, and colonialism. Many of today's economic and political inequalities stem directly from these historical injustices. However, without proper historical acknowledgement, it becomes easier for those in power to dismiss calls for reparations, justice, and systemic change. There is a need, however, for historical justification. There is a need for truthful historical representation. Correcting the whitewashing of history requires conscious efforts in education, media, and policy making. Schools must adopt curriculums across different regions. Media industries should be held accountable for their portrayals of historical events. Governments should acknowledge past wrongs and take active steps to address their lingering effects. Black communities must also take part in preserving and telling their histories. Oral traditions, literature, and grassroots activism play crucial roles in reclaiming the narratives that have been suppressed. Through those these efforts, future generations can learn from the past and work towards a more just and inclusive world. To conclude, whitewashing history is a global issue that has long-lasting consequences on racial equality, education, and identity. By erasing or distorting the past, societies continue to uphold systemic racism and deny black people the recognition they deserve and other races the recognition they deserve. To create a fair and inclusive world, history must be told truthfully and objectively, ensuring that all people, especially black communities, receive the acknowledgement and respect they are owed. Yes, it's been a long time that people have always believed everything was done by a white person. No, not everything was done by a white person. In fact, a few things were done by them. Many things were done by the humanity race. The human race did all the things. Yeah. This is EFK Original Documentaries. I hope you get to learn from this video. That is my hope, by the way. And if you do learn from this video, kindly subscribe. See you in the next one. You can offer me a super thanks. I'll so much appreciate. Thank you so much for my super thanks and my Patreon members and my community membership. I really appreciate for your support. See you and see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.